Royal Guard LOADS his rifle, after Princess Charlotte is stripped of clothes for security search. The morning air was cool, and the stone corridors echoed softly with footsteps as security teams moved into position. There was an event scheduled, one that would bring cameras, visitors, and many layers of protection. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail, or so everyone believed. Princess Charlotte arrived with her aides, walking with the quiet confidence of a child who had grown up in formal places. She was polite, attentive, and calm, used to following instructions without complaint. Her presence always changed the mood of a room. Guards stood straighter, staff became more careful with their words, and even the busiest halls seemed to slow when she passed through. At the security checkpoint near the intersection of the palace, several teams were present. This checkpoint was rarely used for children, especially not for senior members of the royal family, but a last-minute change in schedule had redirected the route. The reason given was simple, an adjustment for safety. No one questioned it openly. In places like this, orders were usually followed without hesitation. Among the guards on duty was a senior royal guard who had served for many years. He was known for his discipline, his calm nature, and his deep understanding of protocol. He had protected important figures in difficult moments and had seen situations where quick judgment mattered more than blind obedience. That morning, he noticed small things others overlooked: the tone of the radio messages, the lack of clear authorization codes, and the uneasy behavior of a junior officer reading instructions from a tablet. As the princess approached the checkpoint, the senior guard felt a quiet tension settle in his chest. Something felt off. The procedures being discussed were not wrong in general, but they did not fit the situation. Certain protocols existed for a reason, especially when it came to royal children. Those rules were clear, written, and reinforced through constant training. The junior officer hesitated while giving directions, repeating parts of the order as if unsure. Another guard asked for confirmation over the radio, but the response came back rushed and unclear. It was framed as urgent, yet lacked the usual markers of a real threat. The senior guard listened carefully, his expression calm, his mind working fast. Princess Charlotte stood patiently beside her aide, hands folded, eyes moving quietly from one uniform to another. She sensed the change in energy, even if she didn't fully understand it. Children often notice tension before adults admit it exists. Her aide gently placed a hand near her shoulder, offering reassurance without words. The senior guard stepped slightly closer, not drawing attention, but enough to hear every instruction being passed down. He asked a simple question, spoken calmly and respectfully, about the source of the order. The junior officer replied with a name, but it wasn't a name that matched the level of authority required. That was the first clear warning sign. In high-security environments, routine can become dangerous when it replaces thinking. The senior guard had learned long ago that safety was not just about force or rules, but about judgment. He remembered past training sessions where instructors stressed one point again and again: protecting dignity was part of protecting life. He requested a pause, framing it as a need to verify details. Some guards shifted uncomfortably. Pausing was unusual, especially with senior figures waiting, but no one challenged him directly. His rank and reputation carried weight. While radios crackled softly, the guard reviewed the situation in his mind. There was no active alert, no confirmed risk, no clear chain of command approval, yet the procedure being prepared suggested a level of concern that didn't match the facts. That mismatch was dangerous. Princess Charlotte looked up at him then. Her eyes met his for a brief moment. There was no fear in them, only curiosity and trust. That look settled something inside him. Whatever confusion existed among adults, his responsibility was clear. He gave a quiet instruction for the princess and her aide to step back slightly, away from the center of the checkpoint. His tone was gentle, respectful, and steady. The aide followed immediately, grateful for the clear direction. Other guards watched closely now. The atmosphere had changed. This was no longer routine. The senior guard requested direct confirmation from command using formal language and correct channels. The response took longer than expected. Seconds passed, then minutes. In security work, time stretches differently. Each moment felt heavy. The senior guard stood still, hands relaxed, posture alert. He did not raise his voice or show frustration. Calm, he knew, was contagious. Finally, a reply came through, but it only deepened his concern. The message avoided direct answers and repeated vague language. That was enough. Unclear orders involving a child were unacceptable. He made a decision. He stated clearly for everyone to hear that the procedure would not continue without proper authorization. His words were firm but respectful. He referenced established rules, training manuals, and prior precedents. This was not rebellion, it was responsibility. Some guards exchanged looks. One nodded slightly, relieved that someone had spoken up. Another looked uncertain, torn between obedience and doubt. No one moved. Princess Charlotte remained calm throughout. Her composure surprised some of the younger officers. She did not speak, but her presence reminded everyone that this was not just a protocol issue. It was about a person. The senior guard positioned himself in a way that made his intention clear. The princess would not be subjected to confusion or unnecessary action. His stance was protective, not aggressive. It was the stance of someone who understood the weight of his duty. An internal alert was quietly initiated, not an alarm, but a formal review request. That alone signaled how serious the moment had become. Higher command would now have to respond. As the checkpoint area grew silent, the senior guard knew that whatever came next would change something. Either the system would correct itself, or it would expose a flaw that needed fixing. He was prepared for either outcome. What mattered most was that the princess was safe, calm, and treated with dignity. In that moment, the guard understood that real courage was often quiet. It was standing still when pressure pushed you to move. It was saying no when saying yes would be easier. And as footsteps echoed in the distance, senior officials approaching, the guard held his position, ready to explain, ready to accept consequences, and certain that he had done the right thing. The silence at the checkpoint did not last long. Footsteps echoed louder now as more officers arrived, drawn by the internal alert and the unusual pause in movement. Radios buzzed softly, then went quiet again as people waited for clear direction. The air felt heavier, like everyone knew they were standing at the edge of something important. The senior royal guard remained steady. His eyes moved calmly from one face to another, reading expressions, weighing reactions. Some guards looked uneasy, others confused, and a few quietly relieved that someone had slowed things down. In places ruled by order, doubt often hides behind strict faces. Princess Charlotte stood close to her aide, who kept her body slightly turned toward the child, offering silent protection. The princess held herself with remarkable calm. She had learned, even at her young age, how to stay composed in formal situations. Still, she sensed that this moment was different. The usual smooth rhythm of palace movement had stopped. A mid-level commander arrived first. He spoke politely but firmly, asking why the checkpoint had been halted. The senior guard answered clearly, without emotion, explaining that the authorization for the procedure did not match established protocol. He quoted specific guidelines, dates of updates, and training instructions. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. The commander listened, arms crossed, clearly torn. He had received the same unclear messages earlier but had assumed they would be resolved by the time the princess arrived. Now, standing in front of the situation, it was harder to ignore the details. He asked for confirmation again over the radio, this time using the guard's exact wording. While waiting, the commander glanced toward Princess Charlotte. The look on his face softened for a moment. Whatever the paperwork said, the reality was clear. This was not a drill. This was a child placed in the middle of adult confusion. The response from command came back slowly, full of formal phrases but still lacking direct responsibility. It sounded like no one wanted to fully own the decision. That hesitation spoke louder than words. The senior guard took a small step forward, not toward anyone in anger, but toward clarity. He explained that continuing without proper confirmation would violate core principles of duty. He made it clear that protecting dignity was not optional. It was part of security itself. Some officers shifted their weight, uncomfortable but listening closely. In training, they were taught that authority flowed down a clear line. Today, that line felt blurred. The guard's confidence made others reconsider what they had assumed was correct. Princess Charlotte looked up again, this time toward the commander. She didn't speak, but her presence changed the tone of the conversation. This was no longer about rules on paper. It was about responsibility in real life. The commander requested a brief private exchange with the senior guard, stepping slightly aside. Their voices were low but serious. The commander warned him gently that refusing an order, even a flawed one, could have serious consequences. Careers had ended for less. The guard listened respectfully. He did not interrupt. When the commander finished, the guard responded simply. He said that consequences were part of service, but regret was harder to live with. He explained that if later review found him wrong, he would accept it. But if review found harm caused by inaction, that would be unforgivable. The commander exhaled slowly. Years of service showed on his face. He knew the guard was right, even if the system around them was struggling to catch up. Meanwhile, a few junior officers watched from a distance. For them, this was a lesson they would never forget. They were seeing leadership not through rank, but through moral clarity. The aide beside Princess Charlotte quietly adjusted her position, keeping the child shielded from the growing circle of uniforms. She whispered something comforting, and the princess nodded slightly. Her calm became a quiet anchor in the middle of uncertainty. Another message came through the radio, sharper this time. A higher authority requested a full status report. The commander repeated the guard's explanation, word for word. This time, there was a longer pause before any reply. During that pause, the senior guard made another decision. He instructed that the princess be escorted to a nearby secure waiting room, one used often for unexpected delays. He made sure it was done respectfully, without alarm, and with familiar staff. The princess followed willingly, trusting the process and the people around her. As she walked away, the tension in the checkpoint shifted again. The immediate pressure was gone, but the larger issue remained. Now it was about accountability. The higher authority finally responded, requesting that all actions stop until senior officials arrived in person. That confirmation alone validated the guard's concerns. The commander nodded quietly, acknowledging the correctness of the decision. Still, the situation was far from over. Word had begun spreading through internal channels. Questions were being asked. How did the order originate? Why was it unclear? Why had no one stopped it sooner? The senior guard stood where he was, aware that his name would be mentioned in reports, meetings, and reviews. He felt no fear, only a steady resolve. He had acted according to training, conscience, and duty. Minutes later, the sound of approaching steps returned, heavier and more deliberate. Senior officials were on their way. The checkpoint would soon become the center of intense scrutiny. As the guard straightened his posture, he knew this was only the beginning. The real test would not be what happened in public view, but what decisions would be made behind closed doors. And somewhere nearby, Princess Charlotte waited calmly, unaware that her quiet composure had already changed the course of events. The waiting room was quiet, filled with soft light and familiar furniture meant to calm nerves during unexpected delays. Princess Charlotte sat on a cushioned chair, her feet not quite touching the floor. An aide stayed close, speaking gently about ordinary things, helping time pass without worry. Outside, however, the palace felt different. Something important was unfolding. Back at the checkpoint, the mood had shifted from confusion to careful attention. Senior officials arrived one by one, their presence bringing a new level of seriousness. Conversations became quieter, more precise. Every word mattered now. The senior royal guard stood straight, ready to explain every decision he had made. A high-ranking official asked for a full account. The guard spoke clearly and calmly, beginning from the first unclear message to the final decision to stop the procedure. He did not place blame or show emotion. He simply described facts, timelines, and protocol. His steady voice showed confidence without arrogance. As he spoke, others nodded slowly. Some took notes. One official asked pointed questions, testing his reasoning. The guard answered each one without hesitation. Years of training showed in his clarity. This was not a sudden reaction. It was a measured response based on responsibility. The discussion moved to the origin of the order. Communication logs were reviewed. Names were mentioned, then questioned. It became clear that the instruction had been passed along without proper confirmation. Each person involved had assumed someone else had verified it. A chain of assumptions had replaced a chain of command. That realization changed the tone of the room. What had first appeared to be a simple delay was now understood as a serious systems failure. The officials exchanged looks. This was bigger than one guard's decision. It was about how easily mistakes could move through even the strongest institutions. The senior guard was asked if he understood the seriousness of challenging an order. He answered honestly. He said he did, but that he also understood the seriousness of allowing confusion to override duty. His loyalty, he explained, was not just to commands, but to the values behind them. One official leaned back in his chair, studying the guard closely. After a long moment, he said that true discipline was not silence but judgment. That statement changed everything. The tension in the room eased slightly. Still, the process had to continue. The incident required formal review. Reports would be written. Interviews would follow. The guard knew this meant long days ahead, questions repeated many times, and decisions made far above his level. He accepted that without complaint. Meanwhile, an official went to check on Princess Charlotte. He entered the waiting room slowly, mindful of his presence. The princess stood when he arrived, polite as always. He thanked her for her patience and praised her calm. She smiled softly, a small gesture that reminded him why the situation mattered so much. He assured her that everything was under control and that she had done nothing wrong. The aide noticed how carefully he chose his words. Respect mattered, especially now. Back at the checkpoint, the officials discussed next steps. Procedures were formally suspended pending review. Temporary safeguards were introduced immediately. No further actions would take place without clear written approval from the highest level. The senior guard was informed that he would be relieved from active duty for the remainder of the day, not as punishment, but as standard practice during review. He nodded, understanding. Before leaving his post, he asked one final question, whether the princess was comfortable and safe. When told yes, he allowed himself a quiet breath of relief. As he walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoed alone. The palace, usually full of motion, felt still. He replayed the events in his mind, checking each choice. He felt tired but certain. Whatever happened next, he would not change his decision. Outside the secure area, other guards watched him pass. Some gave subtle nods. No words were exchanged, but respect was clear. They had seen what he did. They had learned something important. In another wing of the palace, meetings continued. Senior leadership reviewed long-standing policies. questioning assumptions that had gone unchallenged for years. This single incident had exposed a gap that training alone could not fix. Princess Charlotte was eventually escorted back to her normal schedule, surrounded by familiar faces. The disruption had passed, but its impact remained. She would remember the calm voices, the patience, and the sense that adults around her cared deeply about doing what was right. As evening approached, the senior guard was called into a smaller office. He was informed that a full investigation would follow, but that preliminary findings supported his actions. No final decision was made yet, but the tone was respectful, even appreciative. He left the office quietly, stepping into the cool evening air. The palace lights glowed softly behind him. He felt the weight of the day settle on his shoulders, but also a quiet pride. Not pride in recognition, but pride in restraint. He knew that tomorrow would bring questions, paperwork, and scrutiny. But he also knew that sometimes, the most important moments in service were the ones that never made headlines. And somewhere inside the palace walls, systems were already changing, because one person had chosen judgment over routine and courage over comfort. The next morning began quietly, but the calm felt different now. Inside the palace, the events of the previous day were still being discussed in closed rooms and careful voices. Official schedules continued, yet behind the scenes, attention remained focused on one moment that had forced everyone to stop and think. The senior royal guard arrived early, dressed in full uniform, even though he had been told he would not be assigned to active duty yet. Habit guided him. Duty always began with preparation. He checked in as instructed and waited in a small office near the administrative wing. The room was plain, with a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over the courtyard. Time moved slowly. Soon, the review process began. One by one, officials entered to speak with him. Each asked similar questions, but from different angles. They wanted details, exact times, words used, expressions noticed, and choices made. The guard answered patiently every time. He never raised his voice, never rushed his words. He knew consistency mattered. Some questions were difficult. He was asked whether personal feelings had influenced his judgment. He answered honestly that experience had taught him to listen when something felt wrong. Training, he explained, was not just about rules, but about understanding when those rules were being misapplied. Elsewhere in the palace, communication records were being examined. Messages were replayed, timestamps compared, and names traced. What emerged was a clear picture of confusion rather than intent. Several officers had acted with good intentions but poor clarity. Responsibility had blurred as instructions moved too quickly through the system. That discovery brought mixed emotions. Relief, because no harm had been intended. Concern, because the system had allowed uncertainty to grow unchecked. Senior leadership understood that trust in procedures depended on fixing this weakness. Princess Charlotte continued her routine with quiet grace. Her teachers, aides, and familiar guards treated her as they always had, but with a new level of care. No one spoke to her about investigations or reviews. They focused on normalcy, knowing that stability mattered most. Still, word of the incident spread internally. Guards spoke in low voices during breaks. Many expressed admiration for the senior guard's decision. Some admitted they might not have acted the same way. Others said the situation had made them rethink how they understood authority. By afternoon, a formal meeting was held with top security leaders. The senior guard was asked to attend. He entered the room calmly, greeted those present, and stood as instructed. The atmosphere was serious but not hostile. One official summarized the findings so far. He spoke about communication failures, unclear authorization, and the importance of safeguarding dignity alongside safety. Then he turned to the guard and thanked him for his clarity under pressure. The guard listened, expression neutral. Praise was not why he had acted, and he knew the process was not finished. Still, hearing those words eased a quiet weight inside him. New measures were discussed. Additional verification steps would be added for sensitive situations. Training programs would be updated to emphasize judgment and responsibility, not just compliance. Clearer authority markers would be enforced to prevent confusion in future events. As the meeting ended, the guard was told he would remain under review for a short period, but there was no indication of disciplinary action. Instead, he was encouraged to submit a written account for training purposes. The request surprised him, but he agreed. Later that day, he walked through the palace grounds. The stone paths, the trimmed gardens, the familiar watch posts, all felt the same, yet changed. He realized that service was not static. It evolved through moments like this. Princess Charlotte passed through one of the corridors nearby, surrounded by aides. She noticed the guard and gave a small wave, shy but warm. He returned the gesture respectfully. That simple exchange carried more meaning than any official statement. Behind closed doors, leaders finalized recommendations. Accountability would be shared, not placed on one person. The focus would be correction, not blame. The incident would be recorded as a learning moment, not a failure. As evening approached, the guard completed his written account. He chose his words carefully, keeping them clear and factual. He avoided emotion, knowing the document would guide future training. When he finished, he felt a quiet sense of completion. The palace settled into night. Lights dimmed, corridors emptied, and the day's intensity slowly faded. But its impact remained. Systems had been tested and found imperfect. More importantly, they had been challenged by someone willing to stand still when everything else pushed forward. The senior guard left the palace that night with steady steps. He did not know what the final decision would be, but he felt at peace. He had protected what mattered. And inside the palace walls, a shift had begun. One that reminded everyone that true security was built not only on rules, but on conscience, clarity, and the courage to pause when something feels wrong. The final decision came a few days later, quietly and without public attention. Inside the palace, however, it carried great meaning. The review board completed its work, and the findings were shared with senior leadership. Every detail had been examined carefully, from the first unclear message to the final pause at the checkpoint. The conclusion was clear and firm. The senior royal guard was formally cleared of any wrongdoing. His actions were described as responsible, thoughtful, and fully aligned with the core values of service. The review stated that his decision had prevented a situation from becoming harmful and had revealed weaknesses that needed correction. Rather than facing discipline, he was recognized for his judgment. He was called into a small office once more, much like before, but this time the mood was different. The official who spoke to him thanked him for his professionalism and courage. He was informed that new guidelines would be issued across the security teams, shaped in part by his written account and the lessons learned from the incident. The guard listened quietly, hands folded, posture straight. When asked if he wished to say anything, he replied simply that he was grateful for the opportunity to serve and hoped the changes would help others in difficult moments. There was no pride in his voice, only sincerity. Later that day, he returned to active duty. His assignment was routine, just another watch, another corridor, another set of responsibilities. Yet something had changed. Fellow guards greeted him with renewed respect. Some nodded silently. Others offered brief words of appreciation. No speeches were made, but the message was clear. Training sessions were updated soon after. New scenarios were introduced, focusing on judgment, clarity, and responsibility. Guards were encouraged to ask questions, to verify orders, and to remember that protecting people meant protecting dignity as well as safety. The incident became a case study, discussed without names, but with honesty. Princess Charlotte never knew the full details of what had happened. She continued her days with lessons, activities, and family time. What she did remember was the calm voices, the patience, and the feeling that she had been cared for. That sense of safety stayed with her. One afternoon, during a public appearance weeks later, the senior guard was assigned nearby. The princess noticed him among the familiar uniforms and smiled. It was a small moment but meaningful. He returned the smile politely, standing at attention. For him, that was enough. Behind the scenes, palace leadership reflected on the broader lesson. Systems, no matter how strong, depended on people. Rules mattered, but judgment mattered more. Authority required clarity, and silence in the face of uncertainty could be as dangerous as action without thought. The incident was never shared publicly in detail. There were no headlines, no statements, no attention beyond palace walls. That was intentional. Some of the most important corrections happened quietly. The senior guard returned to his normal routine, but he noticed subtle changes. Communication became clearer. Verification steps were followed more carefully. Guards spoke up sooner when something felt unclear. The culture had shifted just a little, but enough to matter. One evening, as he stood watch under the soft glow of palace lights, he reflected on the experience. He had not set out to make a difference. He had simply listened to his training, his experience, and his conscience. That combination had guided him when routine had failed. He understood now that true service was not about force or authority. It was about responsibility. It was about knowing when to act and when to stop. It was about protecting those who trusted you, even when doing so carried personal risk. As time passed, the incident faded into memory, but its lessons remained. New guards were trained with those lessons in mind. Senior leaders remembered the pause that had prevented a mistake, and the palace continued its work, quieter and stronger for it. The senior guard never spoke about the event unless asked. When he did, he kept his words simple. He said that duty was not just following orders. It was understanding why those orders existed in the first place. And in that understanding, the palace found something valuable, not through drama or conflict, but through calm, steady courage shown at exactly the right moment.